예, 반갑습니다. 연결해서 보겠습니다. 드디어 게스비가 등장하셨습니다. 지나가는 말로 전장터에서 우리 만난 사이 아니야? 이러면서 이제 아는 체 하는 거죠. He smiled understandingly. 시간을 체크합시다. Much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with the quality of eternal reassurance in it. 웃으면 그 안에 어떤 뭔가를 확신감이 들게 해주는 그런 거. That you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. He seemed to face the whole eternal world for an instant, and then concentrated anew with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. 뭐라도 다 너에게 해줄 것 같다는 그런 거부할 수 없는 그런 생각을 갖게 하는 그런 사람을 위한 홀라당 폭빠지게 하는 그런 미소래요. It understood. You just, so far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you, as you'd like to believe in yourself. And assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that, at your best, you hope to convey. 네가 이해되고 싶은 바대로 이해해 주는 것 같고, 네가 너 스스로를 믿는 것만큼 믿어주는 것 같고, 등등등등등. 그런 웃음. Precisely at the point it vanished, and I was looking at an elegant young roughneck, a year or 2 over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being upset. 그리고는 슉 사라졌대요. 그리고 젊은 한 30 정도 돼 보이는 애가 있었고, sometime before he introduced himself, I'd get a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. 아, 아니구나. 똑같은 개츠비구나. 근데 그런 느낌을 갖고 있을 때 그게 없어졌고, 여기 현실적으로 보이는 young roughneck이 있는 거죠. 이게 개츠비죠. 30이 한두 살 넘은 것 같고, 너무 그 스피치를 포멀하게 해갖고 거의 바보 같은 말을 굉장히 조심스럽게 하는. Almost at the moment when Mr. Gatsby identified himself, a butler hurried toward him with the information that Chicago was calling him on the wire. 시카고에서 전화 왔습니다. He excused himself with a small bow and that included each of us in turn. 이렇게. If you want anything, just ask for it or the spot. 원하는 거 있으면 얘기해. He urged me, excuse me, I'll resign you later. 다음에 다시 오든가? 아닐 것 같기도 한데. When he was gone, I turned immediately to Jordan, trying to assure her of my surprise. 내가 놀란 거를 보여주려고 I had expected that Mr. Gatsby would be a florid and corpulent person in his middle years. 훨씬 더 나이 먹은, 뚱뚱한, 좀 화려한 그런 사람일 것 같았는데 이제 30 조금 넘은 아주 멀쩡해 보이는 애라는 거죠. Who is he? I demanded. Do you know? He's just a man named Gatsby. Where is he from? I mean, and what does he do? 앞에서 그 많은 소문들을 쭉 듣고도 이제 그 사람을 본 다음에는 전혀 다른 사람처럼 보이니까 Now you're started on the subject. 너도 다른 사람들하고 똑같이 이제 그 얘기를 이제 시작하는구나. 쟤는 도대체 뭘까? 그거. She answered with a wan smile. Well, he told me once he was an Oxford man. 옥스퍼드 대학 졸업했대던데? 이거는 이제 조던이 직접 들은 거죠, 개츠비한테. A thin background started to take shape behind him, but at her next remark, it faded away. 아, 그래? 그러면 옥스퍼드 뭐 어쩌고 저쩌고 저쩌고 하고 생각을 하고 있는데 However, I don't believe it. 곧바로 그걸 부정해 버리는 거예요. Why not? I don't know, she insisted. I just don't think he went there. 거기 안 다닌 것 같아. Something in her tone reminded me of the other girls. I think he killed a man. 이런 식으로. 각자의 사람들이 각자의 판단을 갖고 있고 각자의 판단을 스스로 다 믿고 있는 거죠. 사람들이 다. And had the effect of stimulating my curiosity. 그럼 나도 또 나의 판단을 계속 이제 진행을 하게 되는 거죠. I would have accepted without question the information that Gatsby sprang from the swamps of Louisiana or from the lower east side of New York. 뭐 어디에서 나왔다 그래도 믿을 것 같더래요. That was comprehensible, but young man didn't, at least in my provincial experience. I believe they didn't drift cruelly out of nowhere and buy a palace on Long Island Sound. 이게 문제죠. 내가 그 provincial inexperience 내가 그 시골 출신이라 그런지는 모르겠는데 야, 저 어린 나이에 이런 궁전을 산다는 건 상상을 못 한다는 거죠. 누가 됐든 간에. Anyhow, he gives large parties. 어찌됐든 뭐 돈은 많은가 봐. 뭐 대충 그런 말이죠. Said Jordan, changing the subject with an urban distaste for the concrete. 너무 구체적인 얘기 하기 싫어하는 듯한 그런 도시적인 태도. Kind of like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. 도시적인 익명성 이런 걸 좀 즐기는 거죠. 가깝지만 너무 프라이빗하면 안 된다. 그런 인티미테 하지만 너무 프라이빗하면 안 된다. 그런 거죠. There was the boom of a bass drum and the voice of the orchestra leader rang out suddenly above the echolalia of the garden. 에콜라리아가 뭘까? 에코를 만들어내는 그런 뭐 그 어떤 확성기 뭐 이런 건가? 그런 것 같기도. Ladies and gentlemen, he cried. At the request of Mr. Gatsby, we're going to play for you Mr. Vladimir Tolstoy's latest work, which attracted so much attention at Carnegie Hall last May. If you read the papers and know there was a big sensation. 최근에 연주된 그런 곡을 하겠다. He smiled with jovial condescension and added, some sensation. Whereupon everybody laughed. 뭐 상당한 sensation. The piece is known, he concluded lustily, as Vladimir Tolstoy's Jazz History of the World. 이따가 재즈 에이지 아닙니까 또? 재즈가 한참 그 빅밴드들이 이게 앞에서 말했던 그 악기들 구성들 있잖아요. 악기들 구성들이 전통적인 그 심포닉 오케스트라, 전통적인 심포닉 오케스트라의 그 악기 구성을 이 작가가 잘 몰라서 그렇게 악기 구성을 얘기했을 수도 있고요. 근데 하지만 이게 심포닉 오케스트라라기보다는 그냥 오케스트라라고 말했지만 이 오케스트라가 실질적으로는 그냥 앞에 요 말이 생략이 된 그냥 빅밴드, 재즈 빅밴드 구성인 것 같기도 해요. 왜냐하면 거기 쭉 나오는 그 악기 구성들이 심포닉 오케스트라, 전통적인 심포닉 오케스트라의 악기 구성이 아니라 빅밴드 구성에 가깝거든요. 그러니까 이때는 그냥 오케스트라라 그러면 빅밴드를, 재즈 빅밴드를 그냥 오케스트라라고 그냥 불렀던 그런 경우인 것 같기도 해요. 근데 여기 나오는 곡도 Jazz History of the World, 그냥 재즈 빅밴드가 할 만한 그런 곡이잖아요. The nature of Mr. Tolstoy's composition eluded me. 도대체 뭘 작곡을 한 건지는 잘 모르겠다. 그죠? elude 했다. 잘 모르겠더라. Just because just as it began, my eyes fell on Gatsby, standing alone on the marble steps and looking from one group to another with approving eyes. 이러면서 보고 있는 거죠. 마음에 드는 듯이. His tanned skin was drawn attractively tight on his face, and his short hair looked as though it was trimmed every day. 아주 정돈이 잘 돼 있었다는 거죠. I could see nothing sinister about him. 악당 같아 보이진 않았다는 거죠. 누굴 죽인 것 같더라, 이런 것 같이 보이지. 이 사람도 자기만의 이제 guessing이 시작되는 거야. speculation이 시작되는 거죠. 이 사람은 도대체 어떤 인간일까? I wondered if the fact that he was not drinking helped to set him off from the guests. 안 마시는 게 다른 사람, 게스비는 술을 안 마시고 있나 봐요. For it seemed to me that he grew more correct as the fraternal hilarity increased. When the jazz history of the world was over, girls were putting their heads on men's shoulders in a pupish, convivial way. Girls were swooning backward playfully into men's arms, even into groups, knowing that someone would arrest their force. 그냥 자기들이 이렇게 쓰러지면 누가 되더라도 이렇게 받아 안을 것처럼. But no one swooned backward on Gatsby, and no French bob touched Gatsby's shoulder, and no singing quartets were formed with Gatsby's head for one link. 근데 Gatsby는 홀로 다른 사람들은 그렇게 그 남녀가 짝을 지어도 Gatsby는 홀로 있었다는 거죠. I beg your pardon, Gatsby's butler was suddenly standing beside us. 실례합니다 하면서 버틀러가 왔대요. Miss Baker, he inquired. I beg your pardon, but Mr. Gatsby would like to speak to you alone. 당신만 오래요. With me? She exclaimed in surprise. Yes, madam. 왜? 도대체 조던 베이커하고 개츠비는 무슨 관계일까요? She got up slowly, raising her eyebrows at me in astonishment. 웬열? 그러면서 가는 거지. And followed the butler to the house. I noticed that she wore her evening dress or her dresses like sports clothes. There was a jauntiness about her movements, as if she had first learned to work upon golf courses on clean, crisp morning. 활발함? 활달함? 뭐 그런 게 있었다는 거죠. I was alone and it was almost 2. 벌써 새벽 2시. For some time, confused and intriguing sounds had issued from a long, many-windowed room which overhung the terrace. 뭔 소리가 났길래? Eluding Jordan's undergraduate, who was now engaged in an obstetrical conversation with 2 chorus girls. 이게 또 뭔 말일까 이것도? Obstetrical conversation, 또 뭔 conversation이냐? And who implored me to join him. I went inside. 자기도 그 나한테도 생각났다. 닉 캐러웨이. 닉에게도 같이 이 코러스 걸들하고 이렇게 뭐 같이 놀자 그랬는데 무시하고 그냥 나는 들어갔대요 안쪽으로. 그러니까 개츠비가 있는 그 집 쪽으로 갔다는 얘기겠죠. The large room was full of paper. One of the girls in yellow was playing the piano, and beside her stood a tall, red-haired young lady from a famous chorus, engaged in song. 노래하고 있었고, she had drunk a quantity of champagne, and during the course of her song, she had decided inaptly that everything was very, very sad. She was not only singing, she was weeping too. 왜 이 언니는 또 멀쩡하게 노래하다 왜 갑자기 또 쳐울어? Whenever there was a pause in the song, she filled it with gasping, broken sobs, and then took up the lyric again in a quivering soprano. 떨리는 소프라노. The tears coursed down her cheeks, not freely, however, for when they came into contact with her heavily beaded eyelashes, they assumed an inky color and pursued the rest of their way in slow black rivulets. 야, 표현 좀 재밌죠? 눈물이 그냥 펑펑펑펑 떨어지는 게 아니라 워낙 그 화장을 많이 해놓으니까 거기에 화장에 머물다가 눈물이 색깔이 검해져고 이렇게 흘러내렸다는 거예요. 참 표현 재밌게 하네. A humorous suggestion was made that she sing the notes on her face. 야, 얼굴에 그 까맣게 이렇게 눈물 흘러지는 게 마치 그 음표처럼 보인다. Whereupon she threw up her hands, sank into a chair, and went up into deep, venous sleep. 그리고는 이러고 이제 쓰러져서 이제 잤대요. 너무 술이 많이 취했나 보죠, 가수가. She had a fight with a man who said he's her husband, explained the girl at my elbow. 별의별 그 일이 다 일어나는 거죠, 여기서. I looked around. Most of the remaining women were now having fights with men, said to be their husbands. 이 남편들하고 왜 싸울까? 남편들이 이제 그만 가자 그러고 그 여자들은 더 놀겠다 그러고 뭐 그러는 상황인가? 뭔가? 왜들 싸우고 있는 게야? Even Jordan's body, the quartet from East Egg, were rent asunder by dissension. 이 사람들도 그때 커플이 세 커플이었나? 그죠? 근데 지금은 퀄티시 됐죠? 네 명? 근데 이 사람들도 이제 의견이 갈리더래요. One of the men was talking with curious intensity to a young actress, and his wife, after attempting to laugh at the situation in a dignified and indifferent way, broke down entirely and resorted to flank attacks. At intervals, she appeared suddenly at his side, like an angry diamond, and hissed, "You promised," into his ear. 반대구나. 남편들은 더 놀겠다 그러고 부인들이 가자 그랬구나. 약속했잖아. 이 시간이면 집에 가겠다고. 근데 왜 그 액트리스한테 눈이 이러고 있네. The reluctance to go home was not confined to wayward men. The hall was at present occupied by two deplorably sober men and their highly indignant wives. 술 취한 애들만 그런 게 아니라 멀쩡한 애들도 안 가겠다 그러고 있는 거죠. The wives were sympathizing with each other in slightly raised voices. Whenever he says, "I'm having a good time," he wants to go home. 여기 또 반대네. Never heard anything so selfish in my life. We are always the first ones to leave. So are we. 그러면은 뭐야? 여긴 또 상황이 어떻게 되는 거야? Well, we're almost the last tonight, said one of the men sheepishly. The orchestra left half an hour ago. 오케스트라도 다 떠나는데 왜 남아 있는 게 이 사람들은? In spite of the wives' agreements that such malevolence was beyond credibility, the dispute ended in a short struggle, and both wives were lifted kicking to the night. 마누라들은 먼저 보내는 같이 가는 거겠죠, 설마? As I waited for my hat in the hall, the door of the library opened and Jordan Baker and Gatsby came out together. 그 서재 같이 있었나 보네, 둘이. He was saying some last word to her, but the eagerness in his manner tightened abruptly into formality as several people approached him to say goodbye. 다른 사람들 앞에서는 다시 포멀하게. Jordan's body were calling impatiently to her from the porch, but she lingered for a moment to shake hands. 아직도 개츠비하고 악수하고 있는 거죠. I've just heard the most amazing thing, she whispered. How long were we in there? 얼마나 거기 오래 있었죠? Why? About an hour. That was simply amazing. She repeated abstractedly, but I swore I wouldn't tell it, and here I am tantalizing you. She yawned gracefully in my face. Please come and see me, Thornburg, under the name of Mrs. Sigourney Howard, my aunt. She was hurrying off as she talked. Her brown hand waved a jaunty salute as she melted into her party at the door. 그리고는 자기네 그 같이 왔던 사람들에게 가는 거죠. Rather ashamed that on my first appearance I had stayed so late, I joined the last of the Gatsby's guests who were clustered around him. I wanted to explain that I'd hunted for him early in the evening and to apologize for not having known him in the garden. 이 말을 하고 싶었던 거죠. 처음부터 당신을 찾아보려고 했고 그리고 금방 못 알아봐서 미안하다 할까. Don't mention it. He enjoined me eagerly. Don't give it another thought or 신경 쓰지 마. The familiar expression had no more familiarity than the hand which reassuringly brushed my shoulder. And don't forget, we are going up in the hydroplane tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. 기억하고 있는 거죠. 약속했던 거. Then the butler behind his shoulder. Philadelphia wants you on the phone, sir. 바쁜 사람이야. 필라델피아에서 전화 왔어요. All right, in a minute. Tell them I'll be right there. Good night, good night, good night. He smiled. And suddenly there seemed to be a pleasant significance in having been among the last to go, as if he had desired it all the time. Good night, old spot, good night. 잘 가게 친구. 갑자기 친해진 듯한 분위기. But as I walked down the steps, I saw that the evening was not quite over. 50 feet from the door, a dozen headlights illuminated a bizarre and tumultuous scene. 12개의 헤드라이트는 어디서 오는 게 또? In the ditch beside the road, right side up, but violently shone of one where rested a new coupe, which had left Gatsby's drive not 2 minutes before. 쿠페는 그 세단이 있고 쿠페가 있죠. 세단은 그 4명이 이렇게 앉는 거고 쿠페는 보통 2사람이 앉는 거. 그런 차의 형태를 말합니다. The sharp jet of a whir accounted for the detachment of the wheel, which was now getting considerable attention from half a dozen curious chauffeurs. 이 사람들이 기다리고 있는 거겠죠? 자기 차 주인들, 이 사람들은 기사들이니까. 근데 이 짠 나타난 쿠페는 도대체 정체가 뭘까? However, as they had left their cars blocking the road, a harsh discordant din from those in the rear had been audible for some time and added to the already violent confusion of the scene. 그 시끄러운 소리 뒤쪽에서 왜? A man in a long duster had dismounted from the rack and now stood in the middle of the road, looking from the car to the tire and from the tire to the observers in a pleasant, puzzled way. 어떤 사람이 나타났길래? See, he explained. It went into the ditch. The fact was infinitely astonishing to him, and I recognized first the unusual quality of wonder, and then the man it was the late patron of Gatsby's library. Late patron 뭐야? 아까 봤던 그 사람인가? 그 라이브러리에서 봤던 이거 진짜 그랬던 사람? How did it happen? He shrugged his shoulder. I know nothing whatever about mechanics, he said decisively. But how did it happen? Did you run into the wall? Don't ask me, said Our Eyes. 맞네. 그 사람이네. Our Eyes 하니까 생각난다. 이 사람 또 뭐야? Washing his hands of the whole matter. I know very little about driving, next to nothing. It happened, and that's all I know. 차를 꼬라 박았나 보네요. 고랑에다가. Well, if you're a poor driver, you oughtn't to try driving at night. But I wasn't even trying, he explained indignantly. I wasn't even trying. 뭔 소리야? An odd hush fell from the bystanders. Do you want to come inside? 정말 죽으려고 한 겁니까? You're lucky it was just a wheel. A bad driver and not even trying. 뭔 말이야? You don't understand, explained the criminal. I wasn't driving. There's another man in the car. 자기가 운전한 게 아니다. The shock that followed this declamation found voice in a sustained aha as the door of the coupe swung slowly open. The crowd, it was now a crowd, stepped back involuntarily, and when the door Head opened wide. There was a ghostly pause. Then, very gradually, part by part, a pale, dangling individual stepped out of the wreck. 차가 갖다 박았나 보네요. Pawing tentatively at the ground with a large, uncertain dancing shoe. 기어나왔나 보다, 사람이. Blinded by the glare of the headlight and confused by the incessant groaning of the horns, the apparition stood swaying for a moment before he perceived the man in the dust. What's the matter? He inquired calmly. Did you run out of gas? Look. Half a dozen fingers pointed at the amputated wheel. He stared at it for a moment and then looked upward as though he suspected that it had dropped from the sky. It came up, 떨어져 나갔다. 그 바퀴 하나가 떨어져 나갔나 보죠. Someone explained. He nodded. At first, I didn't notice. It stopped. A pause. Then, taking a long breath and straightening his shoulders, he remarked in a determined voice. Wonder, tell me, where there's a gas line station? 이 오빠가 지금 뭐라는 거야? 취했나? 뭔 일이 일어나는지도 잘 모르면서 계속 거길 기름 넣으러 가려고 그러는 거죠, 지금. At least a dozen men, some of them a little better off than he was, explained to him that wheel and car were no longer joined by any physical bond. 차가 박살이 났다, 그 말이죠. Back out, he suggested after a moment. Throw in reverse. But the wheel's off. 아니, 바퀴가 다 떨어져 나갔다니까. He hesitated. No harm in trying. 그래도 해봐, 이 말이겠죠. The caterwauling horns had reached the crescendo and turned away and cut across the lawn toward home. 그러니까 그 난리가 나고 뭐 차들이 이제 빼야 되는데 막 서로 빵빵대고 그러고 있는데 다 귀찮아갖고 그냥 집으로 그냥 가는 거죠. I glanced back once. A vapor of moon was shining over Gatsby's house, making the night fine as before, and surviving the laughter and the sound of his still glowing garden. A sudden emptiness seemed to flow now from the windows and the great doors, endowing with complete isolation the figure of the host, who stood on the porch, his hand up in a formal gesture of farewell. 아직 저기서 빠이빠이 하고 있네. 108페이지. 이게 어디까지 가냐? 이 챕터가. 아직 끝날 때가 아닌데. 금방 끝나네. 끝내봅시다 한번. 정말? 몇 분 지났니? 빨리빨리 끝내봅시다. Reading over what I have written so far, I see I have given the impression that the events of 3 nights, several weeks apart, were all that observed me. 한 몇 주 정도씩 떨어져 있는 그 3개의 밤, 그죠? 방금 개츠비에서 만난 밤, 그리고 또 탐하고 머틀의 아파트에 갔던 밤, 그리고 또 뭐가 있지? 개츠비를 우연히 만난 밤인가? 하여간 그 밤들이 나를 이렇게 집중을 하게 만든. On the contrary, they were merely casual events in a crowded cinema, and until much later, they observed me infinitely less than my personal affairs. 나중에 뭐 별거 아니었고. 기본적으로 이 사람은 지금 여기 그 본드 비즈니스 하려고 간 거잖아요. Most of the time I worked. In the early morning, the sun threw my shadow westward as I hurried down the white chasm of lower New York to the Probity Trust. Probity Trust가 어딘지 모르겠으나 하여간 일로 갔대요. I knew the other clerks and young bond salesmen by their first names and lunched with them in dark, crowded restaurant on later pig sausages and mashed potatoes and coffee. 점심 대충 먹고. I even had a short affair with a girl who lived in Jersey City and worked in the accounting department. 야, 그 와중에 썸도 타고. But her brother began throwing mean looks in my direction. 째려보더래. 오빠가. So when she went on her vacation in July, I let it blow quietly away. 그래서 그냥 흘려보냈다는 거고요. I took dinner usually at the Yale Club. For some reason, it was the gloomiest event of my day. 왜? And then I went upstairs to the library and studied investments and securities for conscientious hours. 상당한 시간 동안. There were generally a few rioters around. 라이어터가 여기서 뭔 말일까? But they never came into the library, so it was a good place to work. 소란스러운 사람이란 얘기겠죠. After that, if the night was mellow, I strolled down Madison Avenue past the old Murray Hill Hotel and over 33rd Street to the Pennsylvania Station. 여기까지 기차역까지 슬슬 걸어갔대요. I began to like New York, the racy, adventurous feel of it at night, and the satisfaction that the constant flicker of men and women and machine gives to the restless eye. 뉴욕을 점점 좋아하게 됐대요. 뭐 번잡스러움 이런 게 이제 도시의 번잡스러움 이런 게 이제 좋아지게 됐다는 거죠. I like to walk Fifth Avenue and pick out romantic women from the crowd and imagine that in a few minutes I was going to enter into their lives and no one would ever know or disapprove. 그러니까 이런 게 그냥 상상의 영역이긴 하지만 그 도시의 익명성 뭐 이런 거 말하는 거죠? 그런 거 같아요. Sometimes in my mind, I followed them to their apartment on the corner of hidden streets, and they turned and smiled back at me before they faded through a door into warm darkness. At the enchanted metropolitan twilight, I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes. 가끔은 외롭기도 하고. I felt it in others. 다른 사람들도 그런 것 같고. Poor young clerks who loitered in front of windows waiting until it was time for a solitary restaurant dinner. 혼자 이렇게 돌아다니다가 이렇게 혼자 이렇게 혼밥하는 거죠. Young clerks in the dusk, wasting the most poignant moment of night and life. 글쎄. Again at 8 o'clock, when the dark lanes of the 40s were lined 5 deep with throbbing taxicabs bound for the theater district, I felt a sinking in my heart. 그럼 이제 기분이 착 가라앉는다는 거죠. 저녁 때가 되면. Palms leaned together in the taxis as they waited, and voices sang. And there was laughter from unheard jokes, and lighted cigarettes made unintelligible circles inside. imagining that I too was hurrying toward gaiety and sharing their intimate excitement. I wished them well. 뭐 다들 잘 먹고 잘 돼 사네. 잘 돼 살아. 뭐 그러는 거지. For a while, I lost sight of Jordan Baker. 그러니까 당분간은 그런 이벤트들이 몇 개 있고 당분간은 그냥 자기 일을 열심히 하고 있는 거죠. 그냥 그러면서 이제 뉴욕이라는 도시에 익숙해져 가는 과정이죠. And then in midsummer, I found her again. At first, I was flattered to go places with her. I was flattered. 기분이 우쭐해진 거죠. 그 여자하고 다시 이제 다니는 게. Because she was a golf champion and everyone knew her name. Then it was something more. 뭐 더한 게 뭐가 있어? I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. 아, 조던 베이커한테 이제 슬슬 마음이 가기 시작하네요. The bored, haughty face that she turned to the world concealed something. Most affectations conceal something eventually. affectation, 뭐뭐인 척 하는 거죠. 뭐뭐인 척 하는 거. Even though they don't in the beginning. And one day I found what it was. 도대체 뭘까, 그게? When we were on a house party together up in Warwick, she left the borrowed car out in the rain with the top down and then lied about it. And suddenly, 그러니까 뚜껑을 컨버터블이었나 봐요. 그죠? 컨버터블을 뚜껑을 열어놓고 비 오는데 냅둔 거죠. The story about her that had eluded me that night at Daisy's. 그때 못 알아들었던 얘기. 그게 뭘까? At our first big golf tournament, there was a row, 어떤 그 소란 that nearly reached the newspapers. A suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semi-final round. 공을 움직이면 안 되는데. The thing approached the proportions of a scandal, then died away. 스캔들이 될 뻔했는데 좀 잠잠해졌대요. A caddy retracted his statement. 그 공을 그 손을 댔다 라고 캐디가 얘기했던 거가 그걸 다시 이제 발언 취소. And the only other witnesses admitted that he might have been mistaken. The instant and the name had remained together in my mind. 또 뭐가? Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, short men. And now I saw that this was because she felt safer on a plane where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. 좀 병적으로 어떤 규칙을에서 벗어나지 않으려고 하는 그런 경향? She was incurably dishonest. 정직하지 않았다. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage, and given this unwillingness, I suppose she had begun dealing in subterfuges when she was very young, in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world, and yet satisfy the demands of her hot, jaunty body. 뭔 말일까? 겉으로는 이런 척 하지만 속으로는 이런 거를 적당히 알아서 잘 만족을 시켜주고 있었다? 어떻게? It made no difference to me. Dishonesty in a woman It's a thing you never blame deeply. I was casually sorry, and then I forgot. It was on that same house party that we had a curious conversation about driving a car. It started because she passed so close to some workman that our fender flaked a button on one man's coat. 그러니까 툭 치고 지나간 거죠. 우리 차 그 뒤쪽 팬더가. You're a rotten driver, I protested. 참 운전 그지같이 하네. Either you ought to be more careful or you oughtn't to drive better. 더 조심하든가 아니면 아예 운전하면 안 돼. 당신같이 운전 잘 못하는 사람은. I'm careful. No, you are not. Well, other people are, she said lightly. 다른 사람들은 조심하잖아. What's that got to do with it? 그게 이거랑 뭔 상관이야? They'll keep out of my way. 걔들이 알아서 피하겠지. She insisted. It takes two to make an accident. 그지? 둘 중에 하나가 조심하면 문제 없잖아. 그 말이겠죠. Suppose you met somebody just as careless as yourself. 당신 같은 사람, 똑같은 사람이 둘이 만나면 어떻게? 그럼 사고 나잖아. I hope I never will, she answered. 아, 이게 미래에 대한 어떤 암시이기도 하죠. I hate careless people. That's why I like you. 웬 갑자기 뜬금없는 그 사랑 고백이 급발진하는데요. 당신같이 케어풀한 사람 그래서 내가 좋아하잖아. Her gray sun-strained eyes stared straight ahead, but she had deliberately shifted our relations. And for a moment, I thought I loved her. 이 썸인데 이 정도면. But I am slow thinking and full of interior rules that act as brakes on my desires. 왜? And I knew that first, I had to get myself definitely out of that tangle back home. That tangle back home 그거죠? 그 어떤 언니가 그 광고 막 때리고 그래갖고 막 인게이지먼트 뭐 그런 소동이 있었던 거 그 얘기하는 거죠? 그거부터 해결해야 된다. 여기서 내가 이렇게 더 여자들하고 관계를 진전시키기에는 내가 해결해야 될 문제가 좀 있다. 이런 생각이 있는 거죠. 이 오빠도 참 꽉 막힌 오빠세. I've been writing letters once a week and signing them. Love, Nick. 이게 그 조던한테 보내는 건가? And all I could think of was how when that certain girl played tennis, a faint mustache of perspiration appeared on the upper lip. 그것만 자꾸 떠올랐대요. Nevertheless, 자꾸 조던이 떠오르는 거죠. Nevertheless, there was a vague understanding that had to be tactfully broken off before I was free. 프리가 됐다? 뭔 말이지? 그 얘기 아니요? 백홈 얘기 말고 또 딴 거 있나? Everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I am one of the few honest people that I have ever known. 뭔 소린지. 모든 사람들에게 아주 중요한 카디널 버츠가 하나 있는데 그거를 나는 뭐라고 생각한다는 거야? 아니스티라고 생각한다는 거죠. 나는 아니스티 해야 된다. 그러니까 백홈에서 정리를 하고 완전히 내가 아니스트한 상태가 됐을 때 조던 베이커하고 어떻게 좀 해보겠다. 뭐 이런 말인 것 같기도 해요. 뭐 그러든 말든. 오케이. 오, 챕터 3가 굉장히 짧습니다. 오케이. 챕터 3는 이렇게 정리를 하고 챕터 4로 넘어가 봅시다. 잠깐 끊었다 갑시다.